Most of us don't fall in love with someone, we fall in love with the way they make us feel about ourselves. Alain de Botton. Are you trying to love someone who keeps you at arm's length? Are you exhausted from trying to be good enough for someone to finally choose you fully, completely, without hesitation? Are you stuck in a relationship where you analyze every message, wait in silence, and hope maybe this time will be different? They were close. Then they disappeared. They once cared. Now they're cold. And you can't stop wondering, what did I do wrong? Did I love too much? But here's the painful truth most people don't want to hear. You cannot make an avoidant person stop avoiding just by loving them harder. Not because you're not good enough, not because you weren't patient, but because they are in a fight with their own fear of closeness, a fear stronger than the love you're offering. And the more you love, the more it hurts. The longer you wait, the further you drift from yourself. This is for you, the one who loved alone, who hoped and got hurt. We're going straight to the core of it. Why avoidants only change when they're forced to, and how you can break free and win, no matter if they change or not. When you love someone with an avoidant attachment style, you quickly discover they don't reject you outright. They reject the very idea of love itself. They accept moments of intimacy just enough to preserve their sense of autonomy, but the instant anything surpasses that safe threshold, they pull back. They crave connection, yet only to the degree that their heart still feels secure. They want affection, but dread being bound by it. And you, on the other side, become entranced by those fleeting glimpses of happiness, exactly the bait used by someone accustomed to the push and pull game. According to attachment theory by John Bowlby, 1969, every human is born with a fundamental need for protection and emotional bonding. But for avoidant individuals, that need was fractured during their formative years. They may have endured caregivers who were overly controlling, or conversely, emotionally neglectful and inconsistent. Perhaps in childhood, their fears and tears were never soothed, or each time they sought comfort, they were punished, ignored, or judged as weak. As a result, they learned extreme self-reliance, confident in their ability to manage on their own, and mistrustful of depending on anyone. But the price was high. They no longer believed they were truly worthy of safe, unconditional love. Those buried memories stealthily govern every later relationship. When a new romance begins, they are enthusiastic, offering a part of themselves, but only as long as they feel in control. The moment you attempt to deepen the bond, opening up, sharing more, even asking a simple, "Where are we going with this?" an alarm sounds in their mind. Warning. Freedom at risk. They immediately retreat. They text less, schedule fewer dates, or sometimes vanish altogether. It's not hostility, it's fear. Herein lies the paradox. The more patient you become, the more you forgive and reassure them with, "I'm here, I'm not going anywhere." The more secure they feel in maintaining the status quo. You inadvertently become the cushion for all their avoidance behaviors. That cushion shields them from the cost of confronting their fears. They don't have to change because they're still receiving the warmth of your love without paying the full price of vulnerability. You fall into the role of the healer, constantly soothing, always hoping your unconditional love will bridge the gap and guide them to safety. But the harsh truth is, your love is not the cure. Only when the pain of continued avoidance outweighs the fear of being hurt will they be truly forced to face themselves. Until that moment arrives, every promise, every reassurance, every hope you hold only prolongs the push and pull cycle, making it ever more agonizing. As the relationship begins to deepen, the fear of losing freedom and the fear of emotional vulnerability automatically trigger the avoidance deactivation strategies, emotional shutdown mechanisms. They begin to create and maintain an invisible distance by replying to messages more slowly, going on fewer dates, or simply going off the radar at the exact moments when you're hoping they'll show up. Each of these actions serves a purpose: to avoid facing the deep-seated insecurity that arises when intimacy feels too close. Instead, their mind shifts to neutral topics, distractions, or immerses itself in work and personal hobbies, anything to prevent emotions from rising. But the weakness of this strategy lies in one thing: boundaries. When the other person sets clear, non-negotiable limits, the avoidant no longer has a safe place to retreat. A boundary can be as simple yet firm as, "If you keep going silent, I won't wait anymore." For the first time, The avoidant sees that their withdrawal isn't without consequence. It could actually cost them someone important. That's when the deactivation mechanism begins to break down. They can no longer turn off their emotions without paying a price. Let's look at the story of a charming man who was used to being forgiven for everything. In the past, every time he pulled away, the woman would reach out, send comforting messages, and plan their next date. For him, this game of retreat and return felt normal, effortless, and low risk. But then he met a woman who understood her own worth and could also see the root of his avoidant fear. She looked him in the eye and said, "Either you change or we're done." That wasn't a threat, it was a life demand, a concept in psychology describing moments where life forces a person to confront reality or face an irreparable loss. That statement was the first bell to shatter his emotional defenses. In that moment, he realized, if he disappeared again, he would lose her forever. There would be no backup plan, no safety net. He had to choose between living inside a false sense of safety or taking the emotional risk to keep a meaningful relationship. For the first time, he asked himself, am I even worthy? And that question marked the beginning of change. But the breakthrough didn't end there. When she told him she was pregnant, a new and emotionally intense experience forced him to open his heart even further. Holding the child in his arms, feeling the warmth and fragility of a life completely dependent on him, this awakened a long-buried capacity for secure attachment. He started to understand that responsibility wasn't just about empty promises, it was about real, grounded action. Being present, listening, sharing the joys and worries of everyday life. Each night spent soothing his baby, each conversation about their future slowly dismantled the fortress of fear within him and expanded the space for trust. The key here is the double force at play, a boundary that could not be challenged, and a life event powerful enough to awaken his attachment instinct. Her boundary applied the initial pressure that forced him to stop numbing his feelings. The reality of fatherhood provided the second push, activating his dormant inner attachment system. From there, he not only became aware of his own emotions but also learned how to share them and support others, clear signs of a newly forming secure attachment. This transformation can be linked to the psychological model of earned, secure attachment. When a person undergoes a sufficiently profound shock that forces confrontation with themselves, they begin to develop healthier, safer patterns of emotional connection. Through firm boundaries and life's unexpected demands, avoidant individuals can finally begin to rebuild their trust in relationships and in their own self-worth. What's important to note here is that the reconciliatory criminal strategy isn't a conscious transformation, but rather a complex defense mechanism formed deep within an attachment system that has been wounded. According to Mikulincer and Shaver, 2007, when avoidance strategies like deactivation, turning off emotions, suppressing attachment needs stop being effective, avoidantly attached individuals may shift into hyperactivation behavior, much like those with anxious attachment, becoming unusually intense, desperate, even pleading for connection. But this isn't genuine openness. It's a survival strategy used when the attachment system senses that rejection or abandonment is too painful to bear. We see this cycle clearly in his story, a man who always believed. They all come back eventually. At first, when she left, he felt relief. Finally, I'm free from the pressure, the demands, the feeling of being trapped. In that phase, his nervous system returned to a familiar state: independence, self-reliance, freedom. But avoidance is not the absence of feeling, it's the act of cutting emotion off from conscious awareness. Over time, when silence was no longer a solution but instead became proof of real loss, the sense of relief turned into regret and disorientation. Not everyone has the courage to face that, but he found himself in that rare moment, an emotional shock strong enough to crack through his unconscious armor. American therapist Stan Tatkin once said, "Avoidants want connection, but feel allergic to it. They don't trust that intimacy won't cost them their autonomy. And it's because of that fear that their defense mechanisms become so sophisticated. When threatened, they may try to please their partner, promise to change, even play the victim to keep the relationship alive. But once things stabilize, the attachment system flares up again. Warning: too much closeness. Retreat. This push-pull cycle doesn't just hurt the other person, it leaves the avoidant person conflicted, exhausted, and lost. So in his case, the loss wasn't just about losing a romantic partner. It was the collapse of a false attachment system he had used to maintain a sense of safety. For the first time, he couldn't justify his retreat by saying, "She needed me too much," or "We just weren't compatible." For the first time, he couldn't run. He entered therapy not to win her back, but to find himself again. The real self behind the cold, self-sufficient mask. Someone who, like everyone else, had once longed to be loved and feared being hurt. And this was the pivotal moment when the attachment system was forced to update its core beliefs, no longer based on childhood experiences with emotionally distant caregivers, no longer based on relationships where intimacy felt like control, but based on reality, that real love does exist. And he lost it not because it was wrong, but because he was afraid. We need to understand, healing for avoidance isn't about learning how to love others more. It's about learning to believe they won't die if they become emotionally close. It's about trusting that they can maintain boundaries, stay true to themselves, and still let others in. This process requires time, professional support, and most importantly, new emotionally safe experiences strong enough to overwrite old memories. Loss isn't always the end. For avoidance, sometimes it's the very first moment their defense system breaks, and that is where healing begins. Not because they've magically changed after a breakup, but because, for the first time in their lives, they allow themselves to feel the pain fully, not deny it, not avoid it, not rationalize it. And when an avoidant person can sit with their emotions without running, they're already taking the first steps out of the long-standing isolation their attachment style once built around them. Dưới đây là bản dịch tiếng Anh của đoạn văn bản cung cấp. There's one thing avoidant individuals often don't realize or perhaps know, but refuse to face. Avoidance doesn't just happen in the mind. It happens in every cell, every heartbeat, every disrupted night of sleep. When psychological defense mechanisms are stretched too far, the first thing to speak up isn't logic, it's the body. The theory of psychosomatic symptoms makes this clear. Numerous studies, e.g. Van der Kolk, 2014, The Body Keeps the Score, show that repressed emotions, especially those tied to fear of intimacy or past wounds, don't just disappear. They sink deeper into the unconscious, and when there's no place left to hide, they surface through physical manifestations, racing heart, panic attacks, insomnia, muscle pain, or a suffocating feeling with no apparent cause. The story of this woman isn't uncommon. She never identified herself as avoidant. In fact, she frequently read self-help books, attended self-love workshops, and led a seemingly rational, independent single life. To others, she appeared strong and self-aware. But deep inside, she kept repeating the same cycle: closeness followed by distance, connection followed by emotional shutdown. Each time she left a relationship, she would say, "I'm fine." But it was the kind of fine that made her entire body hold its breath. She didn't cry, didn't get angry, didn't beg. Yet months later, she would wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, drenched in sweat, falling into a panic with no name. Medical tests showed nothing. Herbal teas, yoga, meditation all tried, but her sleep stayed disturbed, her inner anxiety lingering without clear reason. Her body was the only part of her that no longer cooperated with the strategy of emotional suppression. It started speaking not with words, but through biological signals. She had to seek therapy, not because she was weak, but because her strength had become a burden, a version of strength that meant she could never feel, never lean on anyone, never show vulnerability. This was when the real healing began, no longer healing through logic, books, or isolation disguised as empowerment, but through relearning a long-forgotten skill, feeling. Avoidants are excellent at reasoning, but they struggle with emotions. They can explain why a relationship didn't work, why independence is necessary, why boundaries matter. But when asked, "What do you feel in your body right now?" they hesitate, as if the question were meant for someone else. Learning to allow themselves to feel and to stay with those feelings instead of fixing them goes directly against the survival system they've spent a lifetime perfecting. And yet, it is precisely this journey that begins to soften the frozen layers of the nervous system. That is the deeper message the body sends to avoidance. You cannot keep living half a life. One half is fine, accomplished, independent, logical. The other half is frozen, isolated, silently suffering. When the inner voice goes unheard, the body screams. And that scream might come in the form of a panic attack, a mysterious ache, or a fatigue that just won't go away. What this woman ultimately realized is not that she needed a partner to heal. What she needed was a healthier relationship with her own authentic emotions. Only when she felt safe enough to cry, to be angry, to be soft without labeling those as wrong did her body begin to quiet down. Her emotions were no longer enemies to avoid, but signals to follow. And that's the space where a new attachment model, more secure, more honest, could begin to form. Not, I don't need anyone, or I must be strong alone, but I can stand on my own, and I also deserve to lean on someone. Sometimes, the first step to healing isn't changing your thoughts, it's pausing to ask your body, what are you trying to tell me? And having the courage to listen instead of suppressing it further. The truth is hard to swallow, but it's the kind of truth that liberates. Avoidants don't change because of your love. Not because you stayed, not because you were patient, not even because you were different. You could be the most emotionally intelligent, giving, self-aware person, and it still wouldn't crack through the shell of someone deeply committed to avoiding their own emotional world. Because what they're running from isn't you, it's what being with you demands from them. Exposure, vulnerability, and the terrifying possibility of truly needing someone. And for someone who has spent their life surviving by not needing anyone, love feels more like a threat than a gift. Avoidant attachment is not a refusal to love, it is the fear that loving means losing control, losing independence, losing self. So they build their walls not out of malice, but out of necessity. Those walls have protected them from the chaos of emotional engulfment, but they also keep them out of their own life. For them to change, something bigger than your devotion has to appear. Something heavier than the comfort of emotional distance has to knock. And that something is often a loss they can't repair, an ending they can't reverse, a boundary they can't argue with, a consequence too raw to intellectualize away. Change doesn't come in the soft comfort of second chances. It comes in the crack, the place where the old coping mechanism collapses. It comes when silence no longer feels like peace, but like exile. When being alone stops feeling like freedom and starts tasting like grief. It comes when the old excuses no longer make sense, not even to themselves. When their classic exit lines like, I just need space, or it's not you, it's me, feel hollow even as they say them. When the patterns they used to rely on no longer protect them but imprison them. That's why avoidants change not when someone loves them more, but when life asks them to grow differently. Sometimes that wake-up call is subtle but undeniable. A partner who quietly walks away instead of pleading. A child whose need for connection breaks through all their emotional avoidance. A panic attack that keeps coming back no matter how many distractions they use. A therapist who mirrors back the truth so cleanly, so calmly, that they can't unsee it. Or perhaps the weight of a single sentence said at the right moment, I won't chase you anymore. And that moment, that rupture, is what transforms avoidance into awareness. It doesn't magically make them secure. It doesn't flip a switch from fear to faith, but it introduces doubt into the system they've always trusted. For the first time, they realize avoiding intimacy doesn't save them from pain, it creates it. Distancing doesn't preserve freedom, it isolates them. Shutting down doesn't make them strong, it makes them absent in their own life. That is the true beginning, not of a new relationship, but of a new relationship to themselves. And often, it's quiet. Not dramatic. It looks like someone choosing to stay present for 5 minutes longer than they usually would. It looks like someone replying to a message instead of ghosting. It looks like someone sitting in a therapy office, fidgeting, restless, but staying. It looks like someone hearing, I love you, and instead of shutting down, they say, I don't know how to receive that, but I want to try. It's not a romantic movie. It's not a grand confession. It's small, often painful, often clumsy, but it's real. And it starts with this. They have to want to change not to win someone back, but because they've lost something in themselves that they want to reclaim. Healing from avoidance is not about becoming emotionally needy or overly expressive. It's about reintroducing balance to the nervous system, rewiring what safety means, learning that connection is not the same as engulfment, that being known does not equal being controlled. That closeness is not a threat, but a mirror, one that reflects not just flaws but also humanity, also worth, also longing. And that longing is what they've buried under performance, detachment, independence, perfectionism. It's the quiet truth. that even the most avoidant person, underneath it all, wants to be held, wants to be chosen, wants to feel safe enough to stay. But they must choose it. They must walk through the fire of fear, the grief of unprocessed memory, the disorientation of unlearning everything they thought kept them safe. You cannot drag them into healing. You cannot love them into change. What you can do is hold your boundary with clarity and compassion. You can reflect back their patterns without collapsing your self-worth. You can walk away when it's clear that staying would only keep both of you stuck. And in doing so, you become the life event they needed. You become the truth they couldn't unsee. Sometimes, the deepest act of love is to stop rescuing someone from their own reckoning. That reckoning is sacred. It's the collapse that leads to awakening. And if they choose to face it, really face it, it might become the moment they start walking, step by shaky step, towards secure attachment. Not for you, for them. Because the greatest shift is not from avoidance to connection. It's from fear to responsibility, from autopilot to choice, from numbness to truth. And that truth is this: the life they want isn't on the other side of more space, more freedom, or more control. It's on the other side of showing up fully, vulnerably, wholeheartedly, and only they can decide to cross that bridge. The solution doesn't lie in loving them more, being more patient, or constantly proving that you'll stay. The truth is, if your love constantly has to prove itself just to be acknowledged, then it's no longer love. It's a one-sided battle between you and their defense mechanisms. You are not their healer. You are a mirror, a reflection that forces them to confront themselves. And sometimes, that reflection isn't a soft gaze. It's firm silence. It's a door that closes. It's a sentence with no room left for ambiguity. I can't keep loving on your behalf anymore. Esther Perel, renowned relationship therapist, once wrote, "Love is not a permanent state of enthusiasm. It is a verb. It is action, intention, and effort. Love is not just a feeling, it is participation. It is responsibility." So when you find yourself keeping a relationship alive where only you are doing the work you're not loving, you're self-abandoning to maintain the appearance of something that's already emotionally empty. And that sacrifice, while it may feel noble, is actually just keeping both people from emotional maturity. In Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller, a foundational book on attachment theory, there's a memorable line: "If you're constantly explaining your worth to someone, they are not your person. If you always have to explain why you're worthy of love, they're not the one." The right person won't need convincing. They will see you, choose you, and participate consistently and willingly. More importantly, they'll be secure enough within themselves to not experience closeness as a threat. So the solution is not to wait for them to change, but to turn toward yourself. Ask yourself honestly, what are you looking for in love? Are you trying to fill a void by proving your worth to someone avoidant? Are you hoping that your love will be strong enough to heal them? If so, you may be caught in an anxious attachment loop yourself, where instability feels like home. And only when you choose to hold your boundaries and refuse to settle for half-hearted connection do you begin stepping out of that cycle. Remember, boundaries are not punishment. They are an act of kindness to yourself and to them, because when you stop carrying both halves of the relationship, you hand the other person the responsibility for their own behavior. You are saying, "I won't protect you from your fear anymore." If you want real love, you will have to walk out of your comfort zone. And if they don't, if they continue to avoid, stay silent, remain passive, then you are not meant to wait until they're ready. Because waiting in that way means delaying your own peace, your own healing, your own life. A healthy relationship doesn't begin when you chase someone to be chosen. It begins when you are clear enough to choose yourself. When you finally realize you're not here to rescue anyone. You're here to build mutual love, a love where both people show up, both people engage, and both understand that love is not just emotion but investment of time, energy, and emotional responsibility. You deserve that kind of love, clear, safe, and wholehearted. And that can only happen when you stop trying to fix someone and begin healing yourself. When that happens, whether the avoidant person changes or not, you are no longer lost in the gray space of hope and waiting. You have chosen clarity. And from that place of clarity, a real relationship either with yourself or with someone emotionally available can begin to grow. And that is the most sustainable form of healing. Not when they change to keep you, but when you no longer need them in order to keep yourself. And so, the real ending doesn't lie in whether they come back, wake up, or finally realize how much you mattered. The true ending is when you return to yourself, no longer living in the hope that your love will be powerful enough to heal someone who isn't yet ready to face themselves. The ending is when you stop chasing someone's potential and start living in the reality that a relationship only truly exists when both people are present with their full hearts and clear commitment. You weren't wrong for loving, you weren't weak for trying, but emotional maturity, at some point, asks you to know when to stop. To recognize the difference between patience and abandoning yourself in the name of love. If they're truly ready to change, they'll do it not because they were left behind, but because they finally found the courage to stay present with their own emotions. But that journey is not your responsibility. You are not here to save them from their past. You are here to build a healthy future with someone who values that too. Hold on to your light. Don't dim yourself to fit into someone else's shadow. Because real love doesn't ask you to shrink in order to be accepted. Real love is where you get to be fully yourself, whole, seen, and never having to overextend just to be enough. And you deserve that, not less, not halfway, not someday, but now.